This is Tom Fox. I'm the Compliance Evangelist, and I'd like to welcome you to This Week in FCPA, Episode 64, for the week ending August 4, 2017, the 10-year anniversary edition. In this special Saturday episode, Jay Rosen and I return for a wide-ranging discussion of some of the week's top compliance and ethics-related stories, including the Net1 UEPS Technologies declination and how the matter came to the attention of the Department of Justice, which was through being turned in by a competitor. We discuss an article by Brian Cave attorneys Mark Serreri and Kristen Robinson on this issue. OFAC brings an enforcement action against a non-U.S. company. We explore its implications and what you need to do if you are a non-U.S. based company. I take a look at financial health as an indicia for third parties and corruption using the rapid ratings tool. MasterCard uses a Richard Bistrong video in its compliance training. We talk about that. The 10-year anniversary is in honor of Dick Casson and his FCPA Blog, which is 10 years old this week, and as Dick noted in his blog post, is still dancing. We talk about the premiere of my latest podcast, Across the Board, a podcast on boards of directors, risk management, and corporate governance, and the response to Episode 1. We also talk about my August series in 1 month to more effective compliance program, where I talk about 1 month to more effective continuous improvement, which is sponsored by Affiliated Monitors. Jay reports on the state of compliance in both Mexico and Panama after a recent trip to both of those countries, and he discusses his latest article for the SCCE magazine, How Compliance Can Be a Business Advantage. This is Tom Fox. Thank you for joining us on This Week in FCPA. This Week in FCPA is a part of the Compliance Podcast Network. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox. I'm the Compliance Evangelist, and I'm here with my good friend and colleague, Mr. Monitor, Jay Rosen, for Episode 64 of This Week in FCPA for the week ending August 11th, 2017. The 10.
How about August 4th?
Oh, August 4th. Even better. August 4th. Getting a week ahead of myself. The 10-year anniversary edition, which we will explain in this podcast, who that is an anniversary for. Jay, with that fouled up introduction, welcome.
Thanks, Tom. Great to be speaking to you on a Saturday. Normally we do this on Fridays, but I was on a little business travel, so it's nice to have a chance to take a look at the whole week, Monday through Friday, and in the next few minutes, we'll give you our thoughts on what's important in the FCPA world.
Great. So let's just hop right into it. We had actually a couple of declinations announced this week, but I wanted to focus on one, Jay. Net1 UEPS Technologies received a full declination, meaning no prosecution, no declination under the pilot program, no declination with disgorgement. Fully, the DOJ said that we're not going to prosecute. Now, it wasn't released by the DOJ. It came from a company announcement. But the significant thing was that the company had been under investigation for 5 years, and the information which originally got to the Justice Department, which led to them opening an investigation, came from competitors. And two attorneys at Brian Cave, Mark Serreri, and Kristen Robinson, wrote about this in a excellent article called FCPA Investigations, Competitors Dropping the Dime. And I thought, Jay, it was a good chance for everyone to remember that there are many different ways the DOJ gets its information. And certainly company self-disclosure is well known. The DOJ performing their own investigations is well known. Referrals from overseas enforcement agencies, once again well known, but also from competitors. And this is something that companies need to be cognizant of. I had an email exchange with Mark on this, and he said, it was a great result, but they still had to go through 5 years of an investigation hanging over their head, and he's absolutely right. For me, the answer is that you have to have a effective compliance program. You have to have that effective compliance program documented, because when the regulators in the form of the Department of Justice and SEC come knocking, they're asking some pretty serious and tough questions, and you have to have documentation to show them. So congratulations to the company, but once again, an important message that information can get to the Department of Justice from a variety of ways. And this obviously, or rather I would say, it was certainly not a completely unmerited referral from a competitor, because there was an investigation. Even if the DOJ did eventually decline to prosecute, they took a long time to do it, and there was enough there for them to think about it. So for companies out there, they need to understand that really the mechanisms by which the DOJ can find out about even alleged conduct are either unlimited or only limited by the imagination of those who are blowing the whistle.
Tom, was this a client of the firm, or they were just writing about this as a general observation?
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
But I thought pretty significant.
Definitely.
Next, we had something that I think is really going to be more important than it would seem originally, which was we had a OFAC, which is the U.S. Treasury Department's Office of Foreign Asset Control, have an enforcement action against a non-U.S. company. And obviously in the FCPA world, companies domiciled or headquartered outside the United States have felt the wrath of the Department of Justice and SEC for many years in some fairly mammoth FCPA enforcement actions, starting with Siemens through Alstom, Total, BAE, you name the non-U.S. company. But here we had what I thought was a fairly tangential relationship by CSE Global Limited and its subsidiary CSE Transtel Partnership Limited, PTE Limited rather, both based in Singapore. And they had contracted to install telephone equipment for an Iranian energy project. And that violated U.S. sanctions. The problem was these companies were not U.S. companies, yet they routed payments through the U.S. financial system. They were Singaporean companies. And so the money was routed through the U.S. Banking system, and that created U.S. jurisdiction. So in the FCPA blog, there was an article which said that companies should consider the following. Non-U.S. companies should terminate the use of U.S. dollar payments in businesses involved in OFAC sanctioned jurisdictions and parties. So that means if you're a non-U.S. company and you're out there doing business with an OFAC sanctioned party or company, and you run through the U.S. banking system, you're subject to U.S. jurisdiction. So you need to be cognizant of that. 2, U.S. companies should avoid receiving U.S. dollar payments involving OFAC sanctioned jurisdiction. So if a company that's sanctioned pays you through the U.S. banking system, that is certainly a way that can give rise to jurisdiction as well. And then finally, non-U.S. banks should make more appropriate use of customer due diligence and undertakings, along with internal monitoring mechanisms to mitigate U.S. sanction risk. Even if you don't think you're subject to OFAC, you still need to know who you're doing business with, know your customer, know your third party, perform an adequate amount of due diligence. And so a good reminder, but also I thought important because it may signal a new round of OFAC enforcement actions, and that with the current administration and Congress's push towards additional sanctions on Russia could maybe bite companies that didn't think they were subject to U.S. jurisdiction.
So, Tom, next up, we have an article that you wrote about this week talking about what is the financial health of your third parties. What's your takeaway from that?
So I came across a company called Rapid Ratings, and Rapid Ratings generally services the financial industry and the financial services industry, and they have a very slick tool which takes a look at the financial health of a third party. And they advocate financial health as a key indicia of how that third party is going to perform. And when I thought about it, I thought, this is really an excellent way, or an excellent additional tool, rather, for the anti-corruption compliance practitioner. In addition to the AML or other compliance practitioner, because financial health really tells you, one, how well a third party could deliver a product, but also if they are sloppy in their bookkeeping, if they've missed audits or deadlines, if they are perpetually being sued or late on paying their taxes. That's the kind of company that would have the moral flexibility, let's just say, to cut corners. And by cutting corners in the FCPA world, that can mean paying bribes to get contracts. So I thought it was a really interesting tool that these guys have. They have a huge database of information now. And it was, I think, once again, many of the cutting edge tools in due diligence come from the financial industry and the financial services world around money laundering. And this is one more tool that I thought was significant for the compliance practitioner to begin to consider a more holistic and well-rounded view of your third parties, who you're doing business with, your joint venture partners, or anyone else that really you're going to be in bed with on a business basis, and why it's important to have that information going forward. So
good stuff. So, go ahead, Tom. Sorry. I was going to say, so next up, we have an article this week from the Wall Street Journal, and Sam Rubenfeld does an interview with MasterCard that has just recently instituted some anti-corruption training with our good friend Richard Bistrong. And Sam talks to Karen Griffin, who's the Chief Compliance Officer for MasterCard. They talked about how they developed with this program with Richard. And what's really nice for the compliance community as a whole is they're also allowing this this film to be licensed to other corporations, because they feel the message is so important, and that it doesn't just speak to MasterCard as its own industry, but it can be useful to other folks. So I think that's a great perspective, that, if you've come up with a tool that you think is going to work and excite your workforce to learn about ethics and compliance, I think it's great that MasterCard is making that available to other folks within the FCPA and the ethics compliance world.
So, Jay, that really leads into what I am really most excited about this week, and why we've named this episode the 10-year anniversary episode. And it's because this week, the FCPA blog, Dick Casson, has celebrated 10 years of being in existence. And in many ways, I think this podcast owes a tip of the hat to the FCPA blog, as does every other blogger in the compliance space. Dick Casson was the first to start blogging about FCPA and compliance. He is certainly the grandfather, and he certainly led the way. And 10 years, I've been doing this since 2009. Others have been doing it as well. And but he's the granddaddy of them all. And we all owe a huge tip of the hat to him. We all owe a lot to him. He encouraged me. He encouraged me to write for his blog, and then he encouraged me to blog for myself. Then he encouraged me to write a book. So he has really been a mentor and an inspiration to innumerable people in the compliance space. He continues to be one of the hardest working men in compliance, posting multiple times a day, writing multiple times a day. At his FCPA blog conference last year, he said he envisioned a FCPA compliance bulletin board for the entire compliance community, where you could come in and someone could post something. We've talked about a couple of things today already that were on the bulletin board, even if we didn't cite to it. Obviously, the OFAC enforcement action I cited to, but also the Net1 Technologies declination was on there. The MasterCard use of Richard Bistrong's video was on there. Some of the other things we're going to talk about may be on there as well. So it's really an incredible resource. Dick Casson has been a leader in this community. He's been practicing FCPA compliance as a lawyer literally since the law was passed in 1977. As Dean Acheson would say, he was there at the creation. and he's been one of the true leaders in this field. And it's great to see him hit 10 years, and I'm certainly thrilled that we could honor him in our own small way by naming this podcast in the 10-year anniversary edition.
Yeah, it's quite a milestone to hit, and as you said, so many of us in the commentariat definitely owed a huge debt to Richard for setting up this kind of clearinghouse for ideas where people can come in and share their knowledge and, more importantly, learn from other people.
And I would also say that, he'll take really any contributor, and he doesn't criticize. He doesn't call people out. He is truly a Renaissance man in terms of putting out ideas for the consumer, meaning compliance community's consumption. And I think that he's really led in many ways the conversation, but more importantly, the tone of the conversation. So another shout out to Dick. So thank you, Mr. Casson, and thank you to the FCPA blog.
Well done, Dick. And also, Tom, I guess you've just lost another half hour or an hour of sleep because you have another new podcast that debuted this week?
Something like that. I don't sleep very much as it is. But yes, I'm very pleased to announce the premiere of my latest podcast, Across the Board, where I take a look at the board of directors and corporate governance. We're going to look at the board, risk management, corporate governance. I'm going to take it from the board perspective. In other words, I'll have board members on my podcast, but also have senior executives and those who've reported to boards and talk about what it's like, what they think the board needs. It's going to be a really fun series. I've got, I think, 6 in the can now, finally. And the first episode went up this week. I've linked to it in the show notes. And in this episode, I had Richard Lummis, who is actually the host of my podcast, 12 O'Clock High, a podcast on business leadership. Richard is a well-known, or rather serial entrepreneur. He's worked in multiple industries, been on boards, he's reported to boards, and I thought he would have some excellent ideas about the Uber board and its role in the ongoing scandals and controversies from that company. We took a look at the Uber board, both in terms of what they didn't do before the Holder report came out and then what they did do afterwards. So it was pretty powerful and certainly one that was well received. I was trying to see. I guess someone posted some comments. I was trying to find those, but I can't find those right now. But it was very well received, and I'm very thrilled to have that up. It will be posted weekly. It's available on the FCPA Compliance Report, iTunes, Libsyn, YouTube, and JDSupra. And then one other thing I wanted to announce, put forward, Jay, on my podcast series is, I think as everyone knows, I'm doing 12 months, a 12-month podcast series with each month dedicated to a compliance topic of 1 month to a more effective compliance program. And this month's topic is 1 month to more effective continuous improvement, which is sponsored by Affiliated Monitors, your group. And in this podcast, I go through, I think it's 23 days this month, of how to have greater continuous improvement in your compliance program. I've really enjoyed working on this series. There are a lot of specific things that you can do to have continuous improvement. Many are I was really surprised to find low cost, but they're things that will really help you move forward. Obviously, a full-blown monitor or full-blown forensic audit is one, but from that going forward, there's literally a lot of different types of auditing you can do. There's different types of monitoring you can do. So I'll be exploring that really throughout the series. The first 4 episodes are up from the first week in August, and we start off with episode 5 on Monday. So pleased to announce that. Certainly pleased to have Affiliated Monitors as the sponsor. They've helped me to put together some thoughts on really what is different types of monitoring and auditing going forward. So looking forward to that. And once again, thanks for the sponsorship. And of course, it's available on the FCPA Compliance Report, iTunes, Libsyn, YouTube, and JDSupra, as is across the board. But Jay, I wanted to see if we might be able to spend a little bit of time, because you've recently been on the road, and indeed on the road internationally, in a couple of countries south of the border. And what I would like are your thoughts on the people you interacted with, observed, saw, about compliance. Because there's kind of a continuing debate on, is there enough FCPA enforcement? Is there too much? Does the Department of Justice need to ramp up prosecution of individuals? But Dick Casson really is the leader in responding to the following question, which is, has FCPA enforcement done anything? And his answer is, all I can tell you is there's more compliance. So what did you see on your trip and travels around the issue of, is there more compliance out there?
Yeah, I think the answer is definitely yes. And one thing that I just want to talk about is there seems to be a real hunger for compliance, especially from millennials who are in the workforce. And the couple countries that I visited on my trip are both, they're pretty well up there in the CPI index in terms of pressures for anti-corruption, for corruption rather. And what we were doing is kind of training on the code of conduct, and it's really encouraging to see young people out there who not only know the rules and why they're not supposed to do anything, but quite often folks in both countries where I was doing focus groups were saying that they were really proud to work for company X where they were at, because they have a commitment to ethics and compliance, and that is something that they can be proud of. And they know when they're bidding on a government tender, or they know when they're doing something, they're doing it the right way. And that they furthermore avoid entanglements with the government if they can. They would prefer to potentially do business with private entities as opposed to government entities. So for me, as a compliance practitioner, it was just really heartening that we were dealing with these folks, and unprompted, not only did they have the answers, but more importantly, they felt this sense of pride that they were working for a company. Whether it was a global company or U.S.-based company, they knew within their individual country that what they were doing made a difference, and it made them stand out. And they felt really encouraged that they had the training and they knew what to do if the situation would arise.
So, Jay, you also kind of pivoting to that in a little bit different way. You are going to have an article published in this month's SCCE magazine on a topic that I think is near and dear to your heart, and it's certainly one that we've talked about on this podcast, which is how compliance can be a business advantage. And I was wondering if you might be able to just give us a little teaser preview.
Sure, and just as you gave a tip of the hat to Dick Casson to being an early cheerleader and a mentor, and for encouraging you to move forward in this space, I wanted to tip my hat to you. And really how this article came about was you and I were riffing a couple months ago, and you were saying, it would be really great if you took that idea and expanded into a larger article about how you can use compliance as a business advantage. And as you said earlier in the podcast, that you're all about process and embedding controls, and I decided to riff on that. Whereas that we now have so much data streams coming to us from the Internet of Things, and if you were able to kind of bust down, break out from the silos and take the different information out there, and how could you use it not only to be something that you can do to help yourself in your company, but how could you use it to create a business advantage. And hearkening back to what I was just saying about those companies where I was meeting with people, they felt that because they had a robust ethics and compliance program, that it not only differentiated them among their competitors, but it also differentiated themselves among who they chose to do business with. So by taking that as a jumping off point, I've kind of taken how we can bust down, break out from those silos and use information. And that not only puts the company in a position to succeed from an ethics and compliance standpoint, but that might also put them in a position to lead against their competitors.
Well, we certainly look forward to that coming out. We're going to link to it in the show notes. Jay, I think we are near the end of this episode. I will note for the record that we had 2 football games this week, so perhaps we can start our discussions of pro football. Tom Brady will not be talking about any of the concussions he may or may not have had in the past, so perhaps we will need to fill that gap or that void. But nonetheless, a really interesting week, and I was wondering if you might take us home.
Sure. So on behalf of Tom Fox, the compliance evangelist, and myself, Jay Rosen, Mr. Monitor, we'd like to thank you for spending some of your weekend with us and taking a look at the FCPA, the week that was an FCPA, the 10th anniversary edition for the week ending August 4th, 2017. Thanks a lot and have a great weekend.
This is Tom Fox again. Thank you again for listening to this episode of This Week in FCPA. If you have listened to this podcast on iTunes, I would greatly appreciate it if you would rate our podcast. It would help in our rankings and also help get the word out about the only weekly FCPA and compliance-related podcast which reviews the week's events. Also, if you have any questions, please feel free to email me at tfox@tfoxlaw.com. You can email jrosen at jrosen@affiliatedmonitors.com. This is Tom Fox. Thank you very much for listening again to this episode of This Week in FCPA, and I hope you'll join us again next week for another episode.